want to become this. So we're all very focused on becoming.
Right, right.
But not necessarily on being.
Mm.
And then within that being that each moment could be new, but it's separate from becoming.
Yeah.
It's to be in a state of being is to be in a state of experiencing.
Welcome to the Red Beard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Green, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I today have on the show Nicolette de Saint-Amour coming in from San Diego, California. And Niki, as I'll call her on the program, has been on the podcast before with me talking about the Feldenkrais method of somatic education. And that's what we are going to be talking about again today. Niki and I just completed a 4-year professional training in the Feldenkrais method at a school based in Kelowna, Canada. That's in British Columbia. And so we got to know each other quite well over 12 segments of 2 to 3 weeks each, starting in the early part of the pandemic is when we began this Feldenkrais journey. And we've kind of found that we've been pretty compatible learners and explorers of the method as we've gone. And Niki has been offering some really lovely classes and series, both independently through her own practice, but in recent months through Red Beard. She's been generous to offer several 4-week series using some of the Feldenkrais awareness through movement lessons, and it's been really fun collaborating in this way. And so Niki and I, we were just going to talk and share a little bit of our perspective, having now completed the program. And we wanted to reflect a little bit on what are some of the key ideas that we think are useful for beginners to consider. Anybody who's new to the practice, what are some learning principles that make us get the most out of it? And just some of the key ideas. And it's a pretty nuanced method, so we thought we would just speak to that a little bit. So that's the theme of our conversation today. Niki, thanks so much for joining the show again.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to offer the lessons for Red Beard Somatic Therapy. It's just a wonderful creative process, and so much. I think this is such a great topic of just diving in a little bit on the nuances of the Feldenkrais method so people can understand more what this is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, creative is a good word, especially I think for the way that you've been constructing your series. I think part of what is intriguing people and bringing new students in for your series is they've got these great names, somatic middle ground, embodied cognition, the next one coming up, uncommon sensing. So you've got you're poetic with your evoking some of the ideas from the Feldenkrais method. But just speak for a minute, just about how you put together the concept of these series that you're doing.
Yeah, I think creativity comes from a place of void and a place of space. And when I say space, it doesn't necessarily mean that that it's just an empty space. It's that where new ideas and new things can emerge. And so there's many different things that inform me, but there could be different life themes that inform me, different archetypal themes that inform me, different times of the year. I think, and within that, how that informs the structure. And then therefore I find the awareness through movement, ATM lessons that somewhat fit the flavor, the taste of the theme. And that could be something that informs us in our life. The method is meant to be practical. Yes, we can find that, it informs my running, it informs my yoga. Everything's getting much nicer.
Right.
But what is it that you're learning in the process of awareness through movement?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a great way to say it. Well, let's talk a little bit about, let's each speak a bit to how we're putting it to use now more front and center, having completed the program. Let's start with you, and then I'll share a little bit too. But yeah, you're doing these series. I imagine you're doing some one-on-one work. Share just a little bit about kind of how you're practicing right now.
Yes. So for sure, in my one-on-one work, I'm finding there is two parts to Feldenkrais method. There's awareness through movement, and there's functional integration. Of course, now we're also looking at the hands-with practice, hands-on practice, I like to call it. And so, but functional integration to me is a little bit more of a moment by moment process that we've uncovered different parts of the person that there isn't a clarity in how they sense themselves there.
Right.
And more when we can integrate a whole self-image to a person, ATM informs this, awareness through movement informs this, functional integration is a way, I think it's kind of putting a piece of a puzzle all together and you get a whole person, an integrated person. How you do that each time is unique.
Right.
And there isn't, I don't know, a formula for it.
Right. Well, so give a couple that you mentioned there's two aspects to the method, awareness through movement and functional integration. And so just define those a little bit. So not in the theoretical terms, but awareness through movement lessons, those are often group lessons. Of course, it could be one-on-one. Those are sort of structured, guided lessons that help develop certain aspects of somatic awareness or functional awareness. And again, oftentimes in a class format like the series that you've been doing. And then functional integration refers to the one-on-one work that often is hands-on in nature if you're there with the person, although in my view, I'll be curious to hear if you agree with this or not. I think you can take a lot of the functional integration perspective even in an online virtual session. It's almost a little bit like tailoring one of the awareness through movement lessons or multiples of them, tailoring it to the individual sort of in real time, so to speak. So in a way, I think there's a way of doing functional integration in a one-on-one setting online. What do you think?
Absolutely. And this is how I feel like I've been engaging with the process of functional integration. And now we can start to look at the kind of hands with practice. But for virtual, it's like, oh, I'm someone that needs some clarity in how it is I sit at my desk because I get pain. And then you come to Alex or me, and we find, okay, well, this is how we can tailor a lesson to you. And within that process of seeing how you move or what's available to you, it's never really what's not available to you, what's available to you. Right. And then we expound on that. And that there could be greater availability in the thing that you have to do or that you like to do.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit. I'll share a little bit too. So
yes.
Okay, so that's your exploration. Great. And for me, I haven't yet been teaching awareness through movement classes. I might start that a little bit later this year, but just from I have to pick and choose a little bit of what I'm focusing on. But what I've been playing around with, and because you've been there for one of the explorations, but in my Friday neurogenic tremor lab, that's my experimental Friday program with people from around the world. It's a free class, and in that Friday class, I changed the theme this year. It used to just be sort of straight TRE tremoring practice, and we still do that in the second half of the class. But now the experimental aspect of it is working primarily with the Feldenkrais method of waking up different aspects of awareness, waking up different parts of the body and breath neurologically, and doing that each time, and then immediately segueing or transitioning into the neurogenic tremor process from TRE. And what's exciting about it is these are all people who are very experienced tremorers, but they have not, some of them may have some Feldenkrais background, but not necessarily so much. And what we seem to be discovering is that if we take about 30 minutes and we explore something, for example, like the pelvic clock or spine as a chain, or differentiating the head from the spine, or coordinating flexors or extensors. Some of the classic Feldenkrais sort of learning lessons, we can play with those. And then now, as we transition into the more free-flowing aspect of a neurogenic tremor, it's a bit more involuntary movement rather than the kind of voluntary movement that we do in Feldenkrais. But people's tremors are completely changing. New things are opening up. They're freeing up parts of their body that have not sort of been part of the tremoring. Maybe they've heard that tremoring can be a full-bodied experience, but they hadn't really experienced that. So people have been really excited about it, and I myself have been really engaged by it. So that's kind of my kind of bucket list for this year, is to continue in that direction, because there's actually some course material that I'm trying to develop, a lot for the TRE community, about taking some of Feldenkrais ideas as a way to deepen and expand upon the tremoring practice. So that's kind of my own, I guess, creative focus
Amazing.
with TRE at the moment. So yeah. Super fun to explore. I think Feldenkrais himself would have been at least a little bit interested in how these two things
Absolutely
might intersect. Super cool. Well, let's talk about for people who are beginners to the method. We've already defined a little bit the ATM side of it. So class, the group work versus the one-on-one work. Let's see if we can. I think what would be useful to articulate is, what are some of the key ideas that make Feldenkrais different from going to a Pilates class or a yoga class or some other kinds of somatic dance or movement? What are some things that should be on a new student of Feldenkrais's radar that help them start to get the most out of the method? So I'm thinking just practical things, things that we sort of look for as we get somebody up and rolling with the method. So let's just do a little back and forth. What's on you? What are some of the things that you try to get your new students to grasp that help them get the most from this process?
So what I find for newcomers to the method is that these movements can look like movements they've seen before, like Pilates or yoga. And so what can happen is that it's familiar, so they go to the end range of the movement.
Right.
They're still connected to willpower or the achievement of the end goal.
Okay.
So what they start to learn is, in order to sense this or get the most out of the method, I'm interested in the very beginning. I'm interested in the innervation of the movement, the inspiration that comes forth to find that there's a whole sense of myself. So then that's a spreading of attention. And in this attention, there's a qualitative state that can arise. And we're making these very fine distinctions with your attention, with the parts of yourself. So in the beginning, what are these movements all about? Why am I doing this?
No, I love that. Well, so to expand on that, I like that. It's like what happens in the beginning of the movement, not the whole movement. I mean, I think that's a real key of the Feldenkrais method, is that it's taking, when we use the word functional movement just means living and breathing and operating in the real world. And Feldenkrais himself, he certainly knew about dynamic real world activity. He was a martial artist. He studied it extensively. He even developed his own self-defense system as a young man in Palestine. He was a physical laborer for a decade. So here's a guy who knew a lot about functional movement in sort of real-time application. But then, he was a soccer player and an athlete and all these kinds of things. But so when I think about this aspect of the method, it's sort of like, okay, great. That's all well and good that we use, that we learn skills and we apply them in real time with real weight, real speed in application. But where the brilliance of the Feldenkrais method is setting aside time to slow things way down, create a quiet environment externally, free of distractions, internally to slow down to the point where we come to sort of a neutrality and a rest. Almost every lesson we begin laying flat on your back usually, and spending a lot of time to get quiet and sort of sense your starting point. And only then, and now let's say we're exploring a movement like rolling to one side or lifting one knee. The normal way of doing it is we don't just suddenly get to, now I'm rolled onto my stomach, even though most of us, if we laid on our back and you said roll onto your stomach, most people would figure out how to make that happen. But the brilliance of the method is to study within ourselves exactly what happens when we initiate the thought, I'm going to begin to roll. Now what? Does our breath hold a little bit? What's the first thing that moves? And as you say, now if we start to study the qualitative attention, we might spend in a 45-minute awareness through movement lesson, it might only be in the last 5 minutes where the completion of the movement has emerged, for example, rolling onto one's stomach, where everything before that has been getting really clear about how you process and organize to get to that place. And I always tell people that for many people probably start Feldenkrais and don't stick with it because it's kind of boring. It's so slowed down. It seems disconnected from real world movement because of how kind of nuanced it is. But anybody who can get past that initial sort of boredom, you'll sort of realize, wow, there's like a superpower in slowing way down like that, really sensing how your body, breath, mind is in coordination around these kinds of movements, and then ultimately bringing it back into a real world movement or real speed, and finding such a huge shift in what you can sense and feel, what you can control, and your qualitative awareness around it. So I like how you described, that piece of it.
Absolutely. It's everything, because then I can find, like, if I go to do, I don't know, exercise or something like this, I can sense myself in a way that's not mechanical.
Right.
And I can get more bang for my buck with the exercise,
Right.
because there's more of myself integrated in my image. So there's more quality to how it is I'm tonifying my muscles in a way that it's evenly distributed.
Right.
So this absolutely makes you better at what it is you want to do. It is a little superpower.
Yeah. For you regular listeners to the podcast, you know that about half of these episodes focus on TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises. And I wanted to make sure that you know about the Red Beard TRE certification program, our educational platform to certify others. And we have both an online version of that I teach, as well as an in-person version of the training that my colleague Ellen McKenzie teaches in Madison, Wisconsin. My next online certification training is beginning August 3rd and 4th, 2024. That's the first of 3 modules. And the way the certification program works is it's about a 10 to 12 month program divided into 3 phases of learning, each with a weekend connected to it, and then some one-on-one work with me and people on my team to support your learning journey. TRE has been a life-changing modality for myself. It's open to people with any background. I wanted to make sure you know about the program. You can find more information at redbeardtre.com. Well, what I kind of like about the method, and I'm glad it uses the word method, right? It's methodological. I mean, a simple way to say it is it's a way of learning how to learn with more specificity and kind of how your brain and your body learn. And so the reason I like the word method is because it gives you a framework for taking any functional activity. It could be sitting at your desk. It could be playing your violin. It could be, I don't know, how you read. You hold a book and how your eyes move to read. And it provides a framework for potentially getting more efficiency, elegance, quality from any function, driving, lifting something, anything really. but it provides a framework for studying it, finding clarity around how that activity can emerge from you with again greater quality.
Yeah.
And then later you don't have to think about it anymore. Once you've sort of studied it and you've now integrated it into your functional activity and you see that improvement, it's there with you. It's become first it becomes something you bring conscious awareness to, and then later you can integrate and internalize it and go on to the next thing. But I like that. That's what on the one hand, it's like, wow, it took us 4 years to study all this method. But what I like about it is I've really learned how to kind of apply the Feldenkraisian thinking to like anything. Like if I'm trying to figure out why is it that, when I go hiking and my left knee always starts to hurt. Okay, well now I have a way I can study that. Not just go to the physiotherapist or, okay, loosen up my glutes or something a little bit, kind of hoping it catches it.
Yeah.
I now have a framework to slow things down and get more clarity around it, and usually make the change myself.
Right. And that's so, I mean, it's the process of learning that it becomes second nature. It's like, oh, now, and then the opportunity to study in a way that I don't disconnect to myself or to the pain or to the injury and go back to the you fix me paradigm.
Right.
And I can go back to these. I have a resource in these lessons where I can go into my own lab and find out what it is I do to create the pain in my knee or the pain in my back. Which is so, I mean, that's such an autonomy that is so special to have.
Right.
That we have this direct knowing. We have a direct knowing that we can really be engaged with ourselves and our lives, or if I'm going to play the piano, if I'm going to go play the sport, I'm engaged in the world with greater clarity in myself.
I love that. Yeah. Well, another thing that I think is a lesson I needed to learn as a beginner, so it's one that when I began Feldenkrais method specifically, so it's one I try to help nurture in others, is kind of this, it's like what you've already referenced. It's not necessarily completing the movement. It's not the what of the movement, but the how. And my favorite example is, there's a lesson where you're on your back and your hands, you're clasped behind your head, like that, and your knees are bent. And it's a movement where we are bringing one elbow towards the knee. Now, many people could just immediately, if you efforted, you could, you just kind of engage your core and you could bring your elbow and you could touch your knee. People have done sit-ups and crunches and things like that. And some people could do it immediately. Other people, there'd be some effort, to get that much flexion so that the elbow would touch the knee. But the way that that Moshe teaches that lesson is he's constantly telling people, don't touch your knee, don't touch your knee. So the way he structures it is you're bringing your elbow towards your knee as though to touch your knee, but you get in trouble. These are for beginners. You get in trouble if your elbow does touch your knee, because what he's trying to show is don't get all the way there. What's going to create change for you is everything in between, not the final result, the quote unquote goal of elbow touching the knee. And so to me, the big shift is it's not, can I achieve X or Y movement? I mean, like later, there's a time and place to sort of find out what your limits and end range becomes. But the real learning method comes into the foreground when you have let go of the outcome and you're approaching things from a perspective of qualitative ease, or I like a term that Moshe uses, kinesthetic enjoyment, appreciation. It's like, okay, how can I bring my elbow in the direction of my knee? And there's a certain kind of pleasure or that's emerging. I can really, that my breathing is somehow coordinated in an elegant manner. My eyes move first, but it's as though they help lead me in that direction. There's a lightness is starting to emerge. I can feel more of this. I can observe how I use the ground in the parts of me not moving in subtle ways that then give a sense of, And it's all that kinesthetic appreciation
Mhm.
that is the rich neurological learning environment that's what stays with us in terms
Yes.
of finding this kind of ease within a pattern. So that's one that I find myself sort of speaking to a lot. What do you resonate with
Yeah.
that experience?
I,
You have your own
I,
version of
I,
that? Yeah.
yeah, that lesson, it's so much of like, of learning how it is to change the paradigm, to shift the paradigm from, and we're all in this paradigm to become something.
Right.
Since I want to become this, I want to become this. So we're all very focused on becoming,
Right. Right.
but not necessarily on being.
Mm.
And then it's in within that being that each moment could be new, but it's separate from becoming.
Yeah.
It's to be in a state of being is to be in a state of experiencing without the past memories of experience or the past knowledge of experience, or that then inform your decisions now, or what it is your acquisition of learning or goal orientation. It's
Right.
a total paradigm shift.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
real pleasure is found in just in the state of experiencing and being.
Right. I love that. Well, let's talk about some of the key principles that Moshe Feldenkrais and our teachers teach. Some of the key, like, I guess I would think of it as the qualities that emerge as we study this. What are some of the qualities of, I guess, good movement or good function? And let's just kind of go back and forth a little bit. Things like the use of attention or distribution of tone or freedom of choice. Well, you start, and then we'll go back and forth a little bit.
So themes that come are in my practice right now, and in the lessons I bring forth, is the even distribution of tone. So it's so much finding your skeleton.
Right.
And how your skeleton can be in your image to inform you about an even distribution of tone. And what do I mean by tone? It's by muscular efforts that no place is working harder than any other place.
Mm.
And so the question of, do I like the quality of my movement, is the question I'll ask people to ask themselves. Do I like this quality? Or do I like this quality in my daily living? When I'm in a hurry, something has to work harder. And so to be in a qualitative state means that my tone, my muscular efforts is spread, my attention is spread, and that my breathing is free. And these are places I have people refer back to know that they're in a qualitative state of being, because in that way you could sense yourself in a way that feels more elegant, just feels more exquisite, feels more pleasurable.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that example, that evening out the distribution of tone, because to me the contrast of that is when you're doing something and one part of you is working really hard, like, I don't know, let's say like lifting up something with one arm that's a little bit heavy, and if you're relying on your shoulder and your bicep, and it's doing 80% of the work, and it's going to feel heavy, there's going to be more wear and tear on the joint, the possibility of like an overuse injury. But the opposite of that, the even distribution of tone, would be okay, well, obviously your arm and shoulder are a part of that, but what's your spine doing? How is your spine connecting to your pelvis? How's your pelvis connecting to your legs? By bringing conscious attention to the entire movement pattern, can you now find a way to do the same action, say lifting the thing, but you're not hyper focusing on the immediate muscles, the bicep or whatever, and you're bringing the rest of your body into it, creates a tremendous amount of efficiency and things like that. So I love that one as a key principle. One that I find myself thinking a lot about is that was new for me in some ways with studying Feldenkrais, is how much attention he gives to the importance of what he calls the teleceptors. And teleceptors are our eyes and our ears, maybe even our olfactory sense. We
Yeah.
have these three sensory things all in one location, our head, that all have two of them. We have two ears, we have two eyes, we have two nostrils or sources of smell. And this idea that whether we know it or not, our use of our teleceptors is a huge part of how we organize the rest of ourselves in terms of how we face something, how we organize. And so by bringing, to me, a big learning that I've gotten a lot of value in as I have studied functional the kinds of lessons we do on the floor, twisting, turning, rolling, sitting up, all these basic movements is, what's the how do my eyes connect to that are they sort of inert, or are they somehow a part of the movement, or even my sense of hearing or my spatial awareness to the environment around me? If I can wake up those channels or even the very refined movements that happen in the head. So, the way the head sits on the top of the spine has a tremendous amount of subtlety, because we need to have a very refined ability to, in a sense, move our teleceptors, our eyes and our ears and our mouths and our nose. And so if somehow I bring that into my attention when I'm studying some other functional movement, like rolling or, any action, sitting up, etc., if I consciously attend to the use of my eyes and senses, it really helps me amplify the efficiency side of it, also the kinesthetic appreciation, because if there's not a sense of a harmony between my head, neck, eyes, and ears, then to me it feels like a disconnected movement, something that doesn't have a sort of an energy to it. So that's one example I've been kind of thinking of a lot about in my own practice.
Yes, and then of course he also speaks of the head always in relationship to the pelvis, and the head, and this is in a way that the pelvis is the driver and the head is floating up the top.
Sure.
And it's very hard for many people to sense that my head can be free or my eyes can be free or the differentiate. But to me, it's the most profound part of this.
Right.
To have a free head is the most profound part of this whole thing. I mean, Alexander technique was also was very interested. That was his study of as well.
Right.
That the head could be free. So there's great importance to have it, and your orientation just in space of having these teleceptors just be more available and within the image person.
Yeah. What's another one? Yeah, I guess reversibility comes to mind for me. How would you explain, somebody who's never heard the term or the concept, how would you describe it? What's important about reversibility?
Right. So I think we were in a segment with Jeff Haller, right? And we were all.
Oh yeah. Well, no. We're not going to give the Jeff Haller calculus definition of it. No. Let's be more basic than that. I propose.
Well, so for me, in reversibility, or when I'm bringing it into someone's attention when they're doing a movement, is that within any moment they can come back to that. The moment I start to go so much in one direction, what happens with my breathing? What happens with that? So at any moment in space, you have the possibility to change your orientation. And for Moshe, as a martial artist, this was everything.
Right.
It was everything. Even, and all the lessons are very specific to this, that at any moment you can go forward, back, left, right, in all these cardinal directions.
Yeah. And choose to, Well, and the martial arts example comes to mind for me, and in thinking back to my early days with Kendo, Japanese fencing, was sort of one of the sword arts that I did. And the way we would, the real distinction between a beginner and somebody slightly beyond a beginner is when you would execute a sword cut. And then if all you're thinking about is putting all of your effort in that direction, and then somebody comes and they tip you, you're going to be off balance because you've kind of put all of your attention and focus into the sword. And there's a sense, the term we would use is overcommit. It's like we put all of our attention and weight there, and then now we don't have the ability to go back, or we would lose physical stability.
Right.
And so then, what you practice a lot of time is how do you execute a forward strike that has, enough speed and power, but your whole body doesn't go along with it, or you have the ability to quickly do something else. To me, definitely relates to this concept of reversibility.
And there's a real security in that. I feel secure I feel safe in the world when there's this sense that I can orient in many different directions.
Yeah. Well, and I like in reversibility, we learn that as there's certain things. It's like, okay, am I in kinesthetic appreciation, right? Am I not over efforting? Am I not goal oriented? Is my breathing free, meaning I'm not holding it or something? So there's sort of these little things that am I not going beyond a sense of fatigue? Like, am I pausing to reset when fatigue starts to set in? So these are all these kind of things that help us be good learners in the Feldenkraisian perspective. But then we can also ask that, or even, how am I using the ground? We ask that question a lot. But we ask the question, okay, and is this reversible? So I'm going to start to roll. At what point am I sort of, maybe my breath catches a little bit, and it'd be hard for me to go back, reverse the movement.
Yeah.
And I've lost that reversibility, and I might be like using a little bit of effort or momentum. And so in Feldenkrais, we want to see, how can we find elegance in movements where we don't lose the ability to come back to where we started, or to switch directions on a moment's notice. And so I like that. To me, when I do find reversibility in a simple movement pattern, there's a sense of calm that comes with it, as you said, sort of that security. But I also think this is one of the Feldenkraisian principles that we can translate into off the mat into real life a little bit, because to me, reversibility includes this idea of kind of like mental flexibility.
Yes.
Or even when I think about reactivity from an emotional response perspective. Like, by the way, like, there's some traditions that are like, the whole goal is to transcend our emotions and not be affected by. That's not what I believe at all. I think emotions are super powerful. And if anything, we should become more interested in our emotional experiences rather than less. However, but is there choice around it? Can you notice something arising and have options associated with it? So, if something frightens you, feeling the fright, or feeling the surprise, noticing the ripple through the nervous system, no problem with that whatsoever. But if we have trained ourselves to have reversibility, then that can just as quickly as it comes on, it can also recede into the background. And that's the same as any other kind of emotional response, that we can move through it, or we can set it down, or still be in relationship to, the current situation. So that's like one way that I really like that concept of learning reversibility on the mat, but then how do we bring that into our sort of emotional life, so to speak?
Absolutely. So there's some kind of emotional reversibility and resiliency, and there could always be a sense of, I have this neutrality, which is my midline, which is my center that I can come back to. So I find, so it's like, what's the meaning of the movement, and how do you find that it trickles into your well-being?
Wonderful. Well, so let's pick one more. Let's see if there's one more concept that would be worth.
Did we discuss inclusive attention?
No, I think that'd be an interesting one. Yeah, inclusive and exclusive. Why don't you talk about the definition a little bit?
So, so inclusive attention, what we want in Feldenkrais is a person to have a whole sense of themselves, so that attention is spread throughout. Exclusive attention is I start to get too fixated on that pain in my back or my shoulder, and that is what echoes louder than every part of myself.
Broader attention,
and then it's so interesting, because I mean, just speaking of pain, like, some people may always live with pain, but can they have an inclusive attention? that pain can change how the brain responds to pain.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And it's a little bit like, yeah, if you're mostly aware of a particular pain in a focused way, it's like the volume level on that pain is high and the volume level of other things gets lower. That's sort of when we're really bogged down by this, in a way, a mental fixation. So what
Yes.
you're saying is like, if we can learn to make the shift, it doesn't mean that that pain will necessarily go away, but if it can be now included in a broader context where yeah, that maybe that's one element, and there's also there's much beyond that in addition, that way of attending or awareness can often be a more comfortable one, and sometimes a more easeful way to, sometimes the pain will diminish because we've shifted our focus in that way.
Yes, and it's so much that our nervous system can find that there's different possibilities
Right.
by this process of inclusive attention and making these very fine distinctions. Our nervous system says, "Oh, there's different possibilities. I like possibilities."
Totally. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Is sort of that was one key idea that Feldenkrais put language to. I think some people know this intuitively. It's a little bit
Yeah.
like you as soon as you sort of noodle on a problem, you're trying to resolve something, and then you kind of you're fixated on it in a way that it's when you're in the shower or you're sleeping or you went for a walk. It's in these sort of random moments when a new idea or insight might sort of emerge, where in a way the solution might come forward to whatever the problem was. And I think his idea of exclusive attention helps get to that a little bit. And what in a way of what he's saying is that our nervous system as a whole, the intelligence of our entire brain and nervous system, does its best. It's most creative and reorganizes, has that adaptive quality, and Feldenkrais believed that we possess way more neuroplasticity than historically. And now other things are catching up, and we now know how, but he believed that, many decades before it was sort of proven, which was, to me, a pretty cool insight from him. So, but this idea that we have to be able to shift away from the fixation on problems, whether they're physical, emotional, psychological, logical, that it's when we can bring in the rest of the nervous system in a way and create the conditions where it can respond and adapt in real time. Now there's where we have the opportunity for a solution or an elegance or something to emerge.
And that's the use of how we find within the lessons novelty and variation to bring forth some new insight.
Right. Well, and I'm somebody who's like pretty good at exclusive attention, sort of focused thinking. My wife can attest to that. She'll try to interrupt me when I'm sort of thinking about something. And I don't want to totally give up to me, I don't want to make it seem that there's not a value to both. I mean,
right.
I'll be interested in hearing your perspective, because I'll tell you what I believe. Maybe this is self-serving because I'm a good exclusive attender. But what I like about exclusive attention, sort of focused awareness, is where we've reduced. Let's say we're trying to clarify our hip joint within ourselves in a lesson. Well, okay, if I begin by paying attention to my eyeball and the sounds of the room, and okay, yeah, there's my hip. If I start with that really broad awareness, I may not be able to focus in on the area that I'm trying to improve or develop more awareness around. And so sometimes exclusive attention is very, very useful in terms of defining a context, bringing a lot of specificity into a sort of a one zone. But then the key thing is, all right, you've done that, you did plenty of that. Now, how do we contextualize? How do we broaden out and include more sources of attention? And now suddenly the specificity that you noticed when you spotlighted something like your hip joint, now can it become part of the whole? So it's not remaining as a part, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. Like, I think it was in embodied cognition series that I taught this lesson, really clarifying the parts of the sacrum, the hip joint. And for some people, that could be like, oh, like, this is quite, I never paid attention to things. And so it takes me one or two times or three times of referring back to the lesson. I can sense that movement.
Right.
I could sense that movement because my attention is growing. Something is refining in my image. It took that exclusive attention, but it's always in relationship to the greater whole.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
it's always this, I'm relating to something else, or that's clarifying that, right? I think, and then it's a relationship between internal world and external world. It's a relationship of inclusive and exclusive that
Right.
inform each other.
Yeah. Someday I'll do a little bit more. Maybe you and I can talk more about this, but part of the reason that I got interested in Feldenkrais method, well, there were a bunch of reasons, and I read a lot of his writing and this and that. But one of the reasons was that when I would practice Feldenkrais, I found a real similarity in the way that the quality of awareness and mind that would emerge for me, similar to when I would practice martial arts or even in Zen meditation. And so that I found that there was something about paying attention in that way that brought forth that quality of awareness that we look for in Zen training specifically. And in our particular lineage of Zen, which connects a lot to martial arts, we talk a lot about a concept that called immovable mind. It comes from this old text written by as a sort of a series of letters between a swordsman and a Buddhist Zen monk or Zen master. And it's the Buddhist master explaining to the sword person, hey, you already know all these things about Buddhism through your sword training. Let me see if I can point it out to you that you already are doing this in a way. And what it's mostly talking about is this concept of a quality of mind or a quality of attention that doesn't get fixated, that doesn't stop or dwell or get stuck. So it's this idea that as soon as your mind attaches or fixates, now it loses a sense of freedom or possibility. And to me, that's really it's a direct connection to what we're looking for in Feldenkrais method as well, which is how do we go from that focused attention, which is a little bit more in that direction can be in the direction of sort of fixation, and then broaden it into the whole experience. And so that shift of being, kind of having your mind kind of stick on details to suddenly you're living in the full picture in a coordinated manner.
Yeah.
That transition, I find that Feldenkrais really supports it really well for me. So I don't know. I just thought I'd share that
I love
connection I've
that.
been thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I did you expound on that, it's like it's curiosity we're working with. That I can sense. This is it's a sensory method. I'm learning how to sense myself.
Right.
And with that, it's always maybe this, maybe that, maybe heavy, maybe lighter, longer, whatever the sensory distinctions I'm making.
Right.
So we are the sensory center of our world, relating to it in a way that when I'm in the world of sensation, I can sense each moment can be new. And it's even when I engaged in jujitsu, for instance, is this direction possible? What's the weight of the person? Where's their ground? Where's my ground? I'm constantly in a maybe this or maybe that process.
Right.
I have to be completely in the moment to be in that maybe this or maybe that process. That is the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Yeah. The moment I have an idea of something,
right,
I've lost the possibilities.
Right. Oh, I love that. Well, Niki, I think this is a good start in terms of bringing in some of the things we've been thinking about and what we think arises from a Feldenkrais practice and the things that help somebody get richness out of it in the early and the later stages. Anything else you want to share or add before we wrap up?
It's been a pleasure. And I find for myself each time I engage in teaching the lessons, it's a learning process and a refinement for me. And just happy to be here and look forward to bringing forth the upcoming lessons on common sensing.
Awesome. Thanks, Niki.
Thanks for the convo.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Red Beard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.